Zane Callahan had always found peace among the stars. Out there, in the vast emptiness of space, it was just him and the hum of the ship's engines, a kind of quiet solitude he'd come to love. No crowded planets, no overbearing superiors breathing down his neck, just open space. The Stargazer had been his home for over a decade, and it was the closest thing to family he had left. But tonight, that peaceful calm was shattered. The red lights on the control panel flickered madly as alarms blared in Zane's ears. His hands moved swiftly across the controls, trying to regain control of the ship. The Veil Nebula stretched out in front of him, a swirling mass of cosmic dust and stars, but something was wrong. His navigation system had gone haywire, and the ship wasn't responding to manual commands. What the hell is going on? Zane muttered to himself, punching the console with frustration. The Stargazer lurched violently to the left, and Zane gripped the armrests of his seat as the ship was pulled toward an unseen force. He scanned the readouts. Nothing. No gravitational pull from a nearby planet, no sign of any stellar anomaly. Yet something was dragging him off course. Suddenly, the ship groaned, and every system went dark. The engines cut off, leaving the cabin eerily silent. Zane's heart pounded as he stared at the dead instruments. He was floating, adrift in space, with no power and no answers. For a moment, panic gripped him. He had run into plenty of technical issues in his career, but this was something else. This wasn't a malfunction, it felt like the ship had been caught in a trap. Come on, he muttered, trying to reboot the systems. His fingers danced over the keyboard, running diagnostics, but nothing responded. Sweat dripped down his forehead as he pulled up the emergency manual overrides. Still nothing. Alone in the pitch-black cockpit, Zane took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising tide of fear. There had to be a way out of this. There was always a way out. Then, a faint light caught his eye. He looked up, startled. It wasn't coming from the control panels. Those were dead. The light seemed to be coming from the lower decks, near the cargo hold. It pulsed softly, a silvery glow, unlike anything Zane had ever seen. What in the... His curiosity got the better of him. Grabbing his plasma pistol from the locker beside the pilot's seat, Zane headed for the cargo bay. He moved cautiously, his boots thudding against the metal floor as he descended the narrow staircase. The light grew brighter with each step, almost hypnotic in its steady rhythm. As he reached the door to the cargo hold, Zane hesitated. He had transported all kinds of cargo across the galaxy, from rare minerals to volatile chemicals, but nothing that should be glowing like that. He took a deep breath, tightened his grip on the pistol, and opened the door. The light exploded outward, flooding the room with an ethereal glow. Zane squinted, trying to make out what was causing the light. And then he saw her. Standing in the middle of the cargo bay was a figure, a woman, though clearly not human. Her skin shimmered with a soft, silver hue that seemed to catch and reflect the light from some unseen source. Her hair, long and flowing, moved as if it were suspended in water, each strand glowing faintly. But it was her eyes that captivated him most, large, luminous, and filled with a depth that made him feel like he was staring into the heart of a star. Zane froze, his breath catching in his throat. He'd heard of alien species before, he'd even met a few in his travels, but nothing like this. Nothing so beautiful. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with a calm intensity that made him uneasy. He realized he was still pointing his weapon at her and lowered it slowly. What are you?" Zane asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman stepped forward, her movements fluid and graceful. She stopped a few feet away from him, her glowing eyes locking onto his. When she spoke, her voice was soft, melodic, like the gentle hum of distant stars. "I am Elora," she said, the name rolling off her tongue like a breeze through ancient trees. "And you are not supposed to be here." Zane blinked, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean, not supposed to be here? This is my ship." I don't even know where here is. Ellora's gaze softened, and she glanced around the cargo bay as if sensing something beyond the walls of the ship. We are trapped, she said, her tone more serious now. In a part of space that does not belong to either of us. Zane frowned, trying to process what she was saying. Trapped? How? What the hell is going on? Ellora's eyes flickered with something like sympathy. This region of space is unusual. It does not conform to the laws of the universe you know. It is a place where time and matter bend, where lost things are drawn and held. Zane shook his head. That doesn't make any sense. I've been through this sector dozens of times. You have passed close, yes. But something has shifted. You were caught in its pull. And now, we are both here, in a place that is not meant to be found. Zane stared at her, his mind racing. Okay, so if we're trapped, how do we get out? Ellora hesitated, her luminous eyes dimming slightly. I do not know. My powers are limited in this form, and the force that holds us here is ancient. Zane exhaled, rubbing a hand across his face. This was insane. He was a cargo pilot, not some hero in a sci-fi adventure. But here he was, stuck on a powerless ship with a glowing alien woman who claimed they were trapped in some mysterious part of space. Great, he muttered. Just great. Ellora moved closer to him, her presence strangely calming despite the chaos of the situation. Do not despair, Zane Callahan. There is always a way. We must work together if we are to find it. Zane looked at her, surprised that she knew his name. But there was no time to question it. He was stranded, and Ellora was his only hope. He just had to trust her. For now. All right, he said, nodding. Let's figure this out. And as they stood there, the dim light of Ellora's form casting strange shadows on the walls, Zane couldn't help but feel that his life had just taken a turn into something far bigger and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Zane had always been the kind of man who preferred action over introspection. Fix the problem, fly the ship, deliver the cargo, that was his life. But now, standing in the dim glow of Ellora's ethereal light, he was faced with something entirely different. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with quick thinking or fast reflexes. The stargazer was dead in the water, if you could even call the void of space water, and his only companion was an alien woman who seemed to know more about the mysteries of the universe than he ever would. Ellora moved through the corridors of the ship like she belonged there, her presence calm, serene, and yet undeniably powerful. Her glowing silver skin illuminated the dark halls, and Zane found himself watching her more than he liked to admit. There was something about her, something more than her beauty, that stirred a deep sense of awe in him. She felt ancient, like she carried the weight of eons within her, but also as if she was seeing everything for the first time. As they reached the cockpit, Ellora stopped, her eyes narrowing slightly as she scanned the darkened control panels. Your technology is primitive, she said softly, though there was no insult in her tone, just observation. But I may be able to assist. Zane raised an eyebrow. Primitive, huh? Well, it usually gets the job done. Let's see what you can do. Ellora placed her hands on the main console, her fingers moving with deliberate grace over the dark screens. For a moment, nothing happened, but then a soft hum filled the air, and Zane's heart leaped in his chest as the ship's lights flickered to life. It wasn't a full reboot, more like a low-power mode, but it was something. He could see the faint glow of the emergency systems, the ship's life support systems, and a few basic navigation functions. Zane looked at Ellora, impressed. Not bad. How did you dash? I can manipulate energy, she explained, her voice soft but confident. In my true form, I am composed of it. But this place, it limits me. I can only access a fraction of my power here. Zane nodded, trying to wrap his head around it. Energy manipulation. Sure, why not? We're stuck in a mystery zone of space. Might as well throw in some superpowers. Elora tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into a small smile. You are amusing. Zane blinked. Amusing? Yes, Elora said, turning to face him fully. Your species often approaches the unknown with humor. It is a curious trait. Zane chuckled, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Yeah, well, when the alternative is panicking, you learn to laugh. Keeps you sane. Elora's eyes softened, and for a moment, Zane saw something almost human in her expression and understanding that went beyond words. A wise approach, she said. But humor alone will not save us. Zane sighed, leaning against the wall of the cockpit. Right. So, any ideas on how to get us out of this mystery zone? Elora's gaze drifted to the stars outside the viewport. We are caught in a quantum anomaly, a region where the laws of your universe do not fully apply. Time, space, and matter are unstable here. It is why your ship's systems are failing. The anomaly distorts everything within it. Zane frowned. And you're trapped too? Can't you just, I don't know, float out of here or something? You said you're made of energy. Elora shook her head, her luminous hair swaying gently with the movement. I am bound to this place, just as you are. In my current form, I am as vulnerable as you. My people are not used to being confined to physical bodies. It weakens us. Zane felt a strange pang of empathy. For someone so powerful, Elora looked fragile now, her glowing form dimming slightly as she spoke. He could only imagine what it must be like for her, someone used to traversing the stars freely, now trapped in a body with limitations, just like him. All right, Zane said, pushing himself off the wall. We need a plan. If this place distorts reality, then maybe we can figure out how to manipulate it to our advantage. There's got to be something we can use. Elora nodded, her eyes thoughtful. There is. One possibility. But it is dangerous. Zane raised an eyebrow. Dangerous? This whole situation is dangerous. What are we talking about here? Elora turned to face him, her expression serious. The core of the anomaly is a singularity, a tear in the fabric of space and time. It is what holds us here. If we can reach it, there is a chance I can use my energy to disrupt its field, creating a temporary escape route. But approaching the singularity is perilous. A singularity, Zane repeated, running the word through his mind. Like a black hole? Similar, Elora said. But not quite. This one does not consume matter. It distorts it, twists it. Prolonged exposure could tear your ship apart, or worse. Zane blew out a breath, rubbing the back of his neck. Sounds like a party. But if it's the only way, we don't have much choice, do we? Elora met his gaze, and there was a deep, unspoken understanding between them. They were in this together, whether they liked it or not. And in this strange, hostile region of space, they were each other's only hope. Very well, Elora said, her voice soft but resolute. I will guide you to the singularity. But you must understand, Zane. The closer we get, the more the anomaly will affect your mind. You may begin to experience things, visions, distortions of reality. You must trust in me to lead us through. Zane swallowed hard. Visions? That's not exactly reassuring. Elora's lips curved into another small smile. You have faced dangers before, have you not? Zane smirked, trying to lighten the mood. Yeah, but most of them didn't involve my brain getting scrambled by a space anomaly. Elora's gaze softened. I will protect you as best I can. But you must remain strong. The entity that controls this anomaly. It feeds on weakness, on fear. Zane straightened, feeling a weight settle over him that had nothing to do with the gravity of the situation. He hadn't signed up for this. He was just a cargo pilot trying to make a living. But now, the stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined, and the survival of both him and Ellora rested on his ability to stay calm, to think clearly, and to trust in something far beyond his understanding. He glanced at Ellora, her glowing form radiating calm amidst the chaos. She seemed to carry an aura of certainty that was almost infectious, and for the first time since this ordeal began, Zane felt a glimmer of hope. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "Let's go find this singularity." Ellora inclined her head, a silent acknowledgement of their shared resolve. She stepped toward the cockpit's control panel, her hands hovering over the navigation controls. Zane watched as a map of the region flickered to life, showing a distorted representation of space around them. At the center of the screen was a swirling vortex, an ominous, shifting mass that pulsed with dark energy. "That's it, huh?" Zane said, eyeing the singularity with a mixture of awe and dread. "Yes," Ellora replied. "The closer we get, the more the distortion will intensify. We must be cautious." Zane nodded, taking his seat in the pilot's chair and gripping the controls. "Cautious. Got it." As he set a course toward the singularity, Zane couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far beyond their control. But there was no turning back now. The only way out was through. Ellora stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on the back of his chair, a comforting presence in the uncertainty ahead. Together, they would face the unknown, bound by fate and circumstance, and by something deeper, something that transcended the boundaries of space and time. And as the stargazer moved forward, drawn inexorably toward the heart of the anomaly, Zane realized that this strange, beautiful alien woman might be the key not only to their survival but to something far greater than he had ever imagined. They were no longer just passengers on a broken ship. They were explorers on the edge of reality itself. The stargazer moved slowly through the strange, warped expanse of space, its systems barely functional as it was dragged toward the singularity. The cockpit windows were filled with a swirling kaleidoscope of colors, blues, purples, and greens, shifting and blending like a living, breathing nebula. Space itself seemed to ripple and twist, distorting the stars and bending light in ways that Zane had never seen before. It was mesmerizing and terrifying at the same time. Zane's knuckles were white as he gripped the controls, doing everything he could to keep the ship steady. The further they went, the more he could feel the anomaly's effects. His head throbbed with a dull ache, and his vision occasionally blurred, as if reality itself was flickering between states of being. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking through a dream or a nightmare where nothing made sense. Ellora stood beside him, her form shimmering faintly, her presence a beacon of calm in the chaos. Her eyes were closed, her focus inward as she stretched her senses to feel the anomaly's energy. Every so often, she would murmur directions, guiding Zane around pockets of distorted space that could tear the ship apart. But the closer they got to the singularity, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Zane could feel it in his bones, a weight pressing down on him, growing heavier with each passing moment. The hum of the ship was low and ominous, and every so often, the walls of the stargazer groaned as if straining under an invisible force. "How much further?" Zane asked, his voice tight as he fought to keep his mind clear. Ellora opened her eyes, glancing at the navigation display, which showed only a swirling mass of energy. "We are close. Very close. The singularity lies just beyond the next distortion field." Zane nodded, swallowing the lump of anxiety that had formed in his throat. He couldn't help but notice that Ellora's glow had dimmed slightly, her movements slower and more deliberate than before. The anomaly was affecting her too. As they moved forward, the ship shuddered violently, throwing Zane against the control panel. He gritted his teeth, pulling himself back into his seat. The lights flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. Then, the voice came. "Intruders. In my domain." It was deep and guttural, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Zane froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice wasn't human. It wasn't even alien in the way Ellora was. It felt ancient, vast, like something that had existed long before the universe itself had taken shape. Zane glanced at Elora, who had gone still, her eyes wide with alarm. "What was that?" Zane whispered, his mouth dry. Elora's face was pale, her glowing skin now dimming further. "The entity," she said softly, her voice barely above a breath. "The being that controls this anomaly. It has noticed us." Zane's stomach turned. "What do you mean noticed us? Can it attack?" Elora nodded, her expression grim. "It feeds on the energy of those who enter its domain. It is drawn to life force, fear, chaos, pain. We must not let it consume us." The ship shuddered again, and the voice echoed through the halls once more, louder this time, like the creaking of a massive, ancient creature. "You will not leave." Zane's pulse quickened. He gripped the controls, trying to push the ship forward, but the stargazer seemed to be moving slower and slower, as if the air around it had turned to molasses. "Zane," Elora said urgently, her voice breaking through the growing panic. "Listen to me. The entity is warping the space around us. If we do not act quickly, it will trap us here forever. I can shield us, but I need your help." Zane blinked, his mind racing. "What do you need me to do?" Elora turned toward him, her silver eyes locking onto his. "I need to draw power from the ship. If I can access enough energy, I can create a barrier to protect us from the entity's influence. But it will take everything the stargazer has left." Zane hesitated. "Everything? You mean we'd be dead in the water? No power, no engines, no life support?" Elora nodded. "Yes. But if we do nothing, the entity will crush us before we ever reach the singularity." Zane's mind reeled. If they used up all the ship's power, there was no guarantee they'd be able to restart it. They'd be floating in the void, completely helpless. But if they didn't act, the entity would tear them apart before they even got close to escaping. "Damn it," Zane muttered, running a hand through his hair. "All right, do it. Take what you need." Elora wasted no time. She placed her hands on the control panel, her fingers glowing brighter as she began to draw the ship's energy into herself. The lights flickered once, twice, and then dimmed, leaving only a faint, emergency glow in the cockpit. The ship groaned, and for a moment, everything went still. Zane held his breath, watching Elora closely as her body absorbed the energy. Her form began to glow brighter, her silver skin shimmering with renewed intensity. The air around her seemed to hum with power. But then, the entity struck. The walls of the ship buckled, metal creaking under the pressure of some unseen force. The voice thundered through the halls, filled with anger and malice. "You will be mine." Dark tendrils of energy began to seep through the walls, twisting and coiling like living shadows. Zane's heart pounded as he grabbed his plasma pistol, firing at the tendrils as they slithered toward them. The shots hit their mark, but the tendrils seemed to absorb the energy, growing larger and more menacing with each pulse of the singularity's power. "Elora!" Zane shouted, backing toward her as the tendrils closed in. "We've got company." Elora's eyes flashed open, now burning with light. She raised her hands, and a wave of energy surged from her, forming a glowing barrier around them. The tendrils slammed into it, recoiling with a hiss as the energy burned them away. But more kept coming, a relentless tide of darkness seeking to consume them. "I cannot hold this for long," Elora warned, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining the shield. Zane gritted his teeth, firing at the tendrils that managed to slip through the cracks in the barrier. The air around them was thick with tension, the entity's presence growing stronger with every passing second. "We need to move," Elora shouted, her voice filled with urgency. "I have gathered enough energy. We must reach the singularity now." Zane didn't need to be told twice. He dove for the controls, steering the ship toward the singularity's swirling vortex. The Stargazer groaned under the strain, its engines sputtering as the last reserves of power were drained to maintain their course. The entity roared, its voice filling Zane's mind with an overwhelming sense of dread. The tendrils lashed out, striking the barrier again and again, each hit weakening Ellora's shield. "We're almost there," Zane shouted, his eyes locked on the singularity ahead. It loomed large, a massive, swirling void of energy that seemed to pulse with malevolent intent. The tendrils closed in, coiling around the ship's hull, squeezing tighter with every second. And then, with a final surge of energy, Ellora let out a cry, and the ship was thrust forward straight into the heart of the singularity. For a moment, everything went dark. The sound of the entity's voice faded into nothingness, and the oppressive weight that had pressed down on them vanished. Zane blinked, his vision clearing as the cockpit lights flickered back to life. The tendrils were gone. The ship was silent, floating in the stillness of space. They had made it. Zane slumped back in his chair, his heart racing as he looked at Ellora. She was breathing heavily, her form dimmed once more, but she was alive. "We did it," Zane said, his voice filled with disbelief. Ellora nodded weakly, her eyes meeting his. "Yes. But we are not free yet. The anomaly. It still holds us. But we have bought ourselves time." Zane exhaled slowly, the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. They had escaped the entity, but the singularity was still ahead of them, and their journey was far from over. "We've come this far," Zane said, his voice steady. "We're getting out of this. Together." Ellora smiled faintly, the light in her eyes flickering with hope. And for the first time, Zane felt that hope too. They weren't just survivors. They were fighters. And the fight was far from over. The Stargazer drifted in the quiet of space, its engines silent after the battle with the entity. Zane sat slumped in his chair, breathing heavily as the weight of the last few hours finally began to settle over him. His hands trembled as he let go of the controls, exhaustion washing over him like a wave. He had faced plenty of close calls during his time as a cargo pilot, but this was on a whole new level. The darkness of space beyond the cockpit was tranquil, almost peaceful, but it carried the eerie reminder of just how close they had come to being consumed by the singularity. Next to him, Ellora was quiet, her glow dim and soft as she sat with her eyes closed, recovering from the tremendous energy she had expended. Her once radiant silver skin now appeared almost translucent, like the last light of a dying star. Zane could see how much the ordeal had drained her, and the thought of how hard she had fought to save them sent a pang of gratitude through his chest. "We made it," Zane said softly, his voice sounding distant in the silence of the cockpit. "We're still alive." Ellora opened her eyes slowly, the silver irises flickering like embers. She gave a small nod, her voice faint but steady. "Yes. But the journey is not over." Zane raised an eyebrow, exhaustion lacing his features. "You mean we're not out of the woods yet?" Ellora shook her head. "The singularity is behind us, but we are still within the anomaly. The distortion field remains, and though the entity no longer pursues us, we are not free. The anomaly will pull us back if we do not find an escape route." Zane sighed, rubbing his temples. "Of course, it's never that easy, is it?" He glanced at the navigation screen, which was still glitching, showing flickers of distorted data. They had escaped the entity's grip, but they were still stuck in this bizarre, twisted region of space with no clear path out. The singularity had been their greatest threat, but the anomaly itself was still an unknown force, one that could tear them apart if they weren't careful. Ellora shifted in her seat, her form slowly beginning to regain some of its brightness. "There is hope," she said, her voice gaining a bit of strength. "Now that the entity has been defeated, the anomaly's energy is more stable. I can sense currents of spacetime that lead to other parts of the universe. If we can harness them, we can ride those currents to safety." Zane frowned, leaning forward in his seat. "Ride the currents of spacetime? Sounds like something out of a science fiction holovid." A small smile tugged at the corner of Ellara's lips. In many ways, your science fiction is closer to reality than you know. Zane chuckled, shaking his head. I don't think I'll ever get used to this. But if you say we can do it, then I trust you. Ellara's gaze softened, and she reached out, placing a glowing hand on his arm. You have shown great courage, Zane. More than you realize. You have faced the unknown without losing hope. That is a rare gift. Zane felt a warmth spread through him at her touch, a sense of comfort and connection that went beyond words. For a moment, he simply looked at her, his thoughts swirling. He had been so focused on survival, on the immediate danger, that he hadn't had time to process everything that had happened. He was just a pilot, an ordinary man caught up in an extraordinary situation. But in the middle of it all, Ellara had become more than just a companion. She had become his anchor, his guide through the chaos. Thanks, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what I would have done without you. Ellara's eyes shimmered, her smile soft but filled with a quiet intensity. We saved each other. Zane nodded, the words sinking deep into his heart. He had never been one for cosmic destinies or grand adventures, but somehow, it felt like meeting Ellara, getting trapped in this anomaly, had all been part of something greater than either of them. And now, for the first time, he felt that whatever was waiting for them beyond this strange region of space, they would face it together. Ellara stood, the soft glow around her beginning to brighten as she moved to the ship's central console. I will guide us to the currents of spacetime. They are invisible to your ship's sensors, but I can sense them. Follow my directions closely. Zane rose from his seat, his exhaustion giving way to a renewed sense of purpose. Got it. Let's do this. As Ellara manipulated the ship's navigation systems, Zane felt a strange calm settle over him. The cockpit hummed softly, the only sound in the quiet expanse of space. The tension that had gripped him for hours finally began to ease, and for the first time since they had been pulled into the anomaly, Zane felt a sliver of hope that they might actually make it out of this alive. Course plotted, Ellara said, her voice strong and steady. Prepare for a turbulent ride. The currents are unpredictable, but once we are within them, they will carry us beyond the anomaly's influence. Zane nodded, taking his place at the controls. I've handled turbulence before. Bring it on. The ship shuddered as Ellara activated the engines, a low hum filling the air as they powered up. The stargazers slowly began to move, navigating through the swirling distortion field with Ellara's guidance. The cockpit windows showed nothing but an endless expanse of warped space, the stars beyond stretched and distorted like light through a prism. But Zane trusted Ellara. She had gotten them this far. As they neared the edge of the anomaly, the ship lurched violently, and Zane gripped the controls tightly, his heart racing. The currents of spacetime were invisible, but he could feel their pull, an almost gravitational force that tugged at the ship, threatening to send them spiraling into the void. Hold steady. Ellara called, her voice clear and commanding. We are entering the current. The ship bucked again, and Zane gritted his teeth, fighting to keep the stargazer on course. The stars outside the windows blurred into streaks of light, and the air inside the cockpit seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly hum. For a moment, it felt like the ship was being torn in two, stretched between two dimensions. Then, with a sudden jolt, they broke free. The ship surged forward, propelled by an unseen force, and the distortion field around them vanished. The stars outside the windows returned to their normal shape, twinkling softly against the backdrop of space. The anomaly was behind them, left far in the distance. Zane let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had made it. They were free. He glanced at Ellara, who was standing beside him, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. Her form was glowing brightly once more, her strength restored now that they were out of the anomaly's influence. We're out, Zane said, his voice filled with relief. Ellara nodded, her gaze softening. Yes. We are safe now. Zane leaned back in his chair, a tired but content smile spreading across his face. So, where do we go from here? Ella turned to him, her silver eyes filled with a warmth that made Zane's heart skip a beat. Wherever the stars take us. Together. Zane chuckled, the weight of their shared experiences settling over him like a comforting blanket. He had never imagined his life would take such a turn, trapped in an uncharted region of space with an alien woman who defied everything he thought he knew about the universe. But now, as he looked at Ella, he realized that this was the beginning of something new. Something he hadn't known he was searching for. He reached out, taking her hand in his, the soft glow of her skin radiating warmth. Yeah. Together. The stargazer glided through the peaceful void of space, its course set not by destination but by possibility. Zane and Ella had faced the unknown and come out the other side stronger. They were no longer lost. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had found a new path. As the ship moved forward, the stars ahead seemed to shine just a little bit brighter, as if welcoming them to the next chapter of their journey. The journey of two souls, bound by the stars and the vastness of the cosmos.